Hello Year 8. So today we're going to start with the homework from last week. So it was this very straightforward homework where all you needed to do was draw a sketch of the pyramid of number represented by this data here. Okay, and I had a look at your answers and it looks like most of you have done a pretty good job on this. So we start at the bottom with 10 cabbages. Okay. So again, I'm not going to do this to scale. Remember, if we were at school, we probably would do this to scale on some graph paper, but we're not going to do that. Okay, so we're going to go with 10. I'll make 10 about this big. Okay, and remember that this has to be in the middle of the graph. And then once we've got 10 cabbages, the next level, we have 100 caterpillars on those 10 cabbages. So each cabbage has got about 10 caterpillars on it. So it needs to be about 10 times bigger. I'm not going to measure it exactly, but it's going to look something like that. Like this. Okay. And then those 100 caterpillars are eaten by 8 thrushes. Okay, and a thrush is just a type of bird. All right, so we've got slightly fewer thrushes than we've got cabbages. So it's going to look a little bit like this. And then those thrushes are eaten by the apex predator, the sparrowhawk. Now I've only got 2 of those, so I'm just going to draw that as a single line. All right, not because there's only one, just because there's not many. So if I was to draw it as a block, it wouldn't be very clear. Okay, and these are your cabbages. These are your caterpillars. These are your thrush and sparrowhawk. Okay, so that is your pyramid of number. So that tells you the number of organisms at each level. And remember, even though most of the time it's going to look like a pyramid, like this, you do get all these weird different shapes as well. Okay, now in today's lesson we're going to move on and we're going to talk about something called biomass. Now biomass has got 2 different meanings. The first meaning here, number 1, is that biomass is a measure of the amount of organisms in an ecosystem. So at this point you might be thinking, well, hold on, Mr. Dwyer, didn't we do that last week? So the number of organisms is a measure of the amount of organisms in an ecosystem. Yeah. So here I've got 10 cabbages and 100 caterpillars and 8 thrushes and 2 sparrowhawks. Or I could go back to last week and I could say, well, look, I've got 1 tree, maybe 1,000 caterpillars, 10 blue jays. These are all measures of the number of organisms. Okay, but the problem is that when we talk about amount, we can talk about either the number of organisms, or we could talk about it differently, and we could think about it in terms of the total mass of organisms. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if we think back to last week, let's take this one here, this one in the middle, the tree caterpillar blue jay. Now, some of you might have been thinking to yourself, yeah, it does look a bit weird with just this one tree down here, but it's not really fair, is it? Because caterpillars are tiny and trees are massive. So even though there's only one tree and there's loads of caterpillars, that one tree is really, really big. And all of these caterpillars are really, really small. So even though we've got 1 here and about 1,000 here, it's not really telling us the whole truth, is it? And you're completely right. All right? That's the problem, isn't it? Is that if we think only about pyramids of number, we don't take into account how big each organism is. All right, so that's what we're doing today. We're going to think about how big each organism is. All right, so what I've got is, just to get us warmed up before we get down to here where we're looking at the numbers, we've got this situation here, this food chain. Sparrowhawks eat thrushes, thrushes eat caterpillars, and caterpillars eat cabbage. And I've got 6 questions here that I want you to now pause the video and answer those 6 questions. Okay, so you should have answered those 6 questions now. If you haven't, go for it, because I'm now going to give you the answers. So, write a food chain to show the transfer of energy between each organism. So it should be cabbage is eaten by caterpillar, is eaten by thrush, is eaten by sparrowhawk. Okay, and you'll notice that this is the same one that we talked about just earlier. Identify the producer. Now the producer, remember, is the thing at the start that converts sunlight into energy. Doesn't have to make any, sorry, it makes all its food, doesn't eat any food. Where does the producer get its energy from? Like I just said, sunlight. Identify a herbivore, eats only plants, that would be a caterpillar. Identify a predator species, so you could have either the thrush or the sparrowhawk, will be fine. Thrush or sparrowhawk. And identify a prey, so a prey is one that's eaten by something else, so caterpillar or thrush. All right, so let's move on. Here is the same table as above, but now I've included the mass of each individual in a population and the total biomass of each organism. So what I mean is, if you look at this table, this part of the table here is the same as this table up here. But what I've done now is I've given you the individual mass of each organism. So one sparrowhawk is 100 grams. One thrush is 50 grams. One caterpillar is 8 grams. And one cabbage is 600 grams. All right. So what we can do now is find the total mass of all of the sparrowhawks. So if I have 2 sparrowhawks, each of them is 100 grams, then the total biomass, so the total amount of the mass of the organisms in this level is going to be 2 times 100, 200. Okay. If I have 8 thrushes and each one weighs 50 grams, all those thrushes together weigh 400 grams. If I have 100 caterpillars, each one has a mass of 8. That's a total mass of 800. And if I have 10 cabbages, each one has a mass of 600 grams. That's a total biomass of 6,000. So now we're going to draw another pyramid. But this time it's going to be a pyramid of biomass. All right, so this is our pyramid of number, telling us the number of each organism. Now we're going to draw one which tells us the mass of all of the organisms. So we do it, usually you can see here we would do it on graph paper. I'm not doing it on graph paper just in case some of you don't have graph paper. If you've got graph paper and you want to do it on graph paper, that's fine, go ahead. But I'm just going to sketch it here. Okay, so here, I've made it a little bit difficult to label this. This is going to be the total mass of organisms, okay, or we can call it biomass. All right, and then up here again, as before, this is just the particular organism. So now, instead of having 10 cabbages, we've now got a biomass of 6,000 grams, okay, which is loads, isn't it? Okay, so we're going to put down here, remember it's not to scale, okay, so that's our 6,000 grams of cabbage. Now, next, caterpillar. Before we would have had 100, which would have been loads compared to the other numbers, but now we've got 800, which isn't that much, is it? Okay, so that's a lot less. So that's probably going to look something like this. Okay, and then we go to the next level, 400, which is about half of the previous level. So it would look like that. And then 200, which again is half of the previous level. So it would look like that. All right, and we label it again. So this will be our cabbage, caterpillar, thrush, and sparrowhawk. Okay, and you can see that this now looks much more like a pyramid. So before, with the pyramid of number, it looked like this, whereas now with the pyramid of biomass, it looks like this. And that's because it takes into account the fact that even though we've only got a few cabbages, each individual cabbage is got quite a large mass. So the total mass of those few cabbages is very large. All right? Good. Okay, so what we need to do now is, this is what I would like you to do for your homework. All right? Just as I've just done for the previous example, and if you didn't get it all, you can pause the video and you can go back and watch it again to remind yourself. Okay, but I would like you to complete this table as the last table was completed for the total biomass, and then I would like you to plot a pyramid of number. Okay, plot a pyramid of number. Okay, so that's going to be using this data here. Again, you don't need to do it on graph paper, so you can ignore this bit here. Okay, you can just sketch it out, and then I want you to plot a pyramid of biomass, so like we've just done, and that will be using this data here. Okay, and then you need to answer these questions here. So draw a food chain for the pyramids you have drawn in questions 9 and 10. Okay, so draw a food chain for this situation. Explain why the pyramid of number does not look like a pyramid. What does biomass mean? And what happens to the amount of biomass as you go up each level of the pyramid? So you just need to answer those questions. So that is your homework. Now, once you've done that, we do have down here a little bit more information about biomass. So remember I said at the start, I said that biomass has two meanings. The first one is a measure of the amount of the organisms, and that gives us our pyramid of biomass. The second one is biomass as a source of renewable energy. Okay, so biomass is a type of energy resource. Okay, so it is used to describe organic material that comes from plants and animals, which is used as a renewable energy source. So I would like you to also just read through this information here. Okay, now there aren't any questions on this, all right, but I will ask you questions on this in the end of term test. All right, so you might want to highlight some important things here and remind yourself of those. Okay, so you don't need to send me anything for that, though. What you need to do is, on the Firefly task, send me a picture of the answers to these questions. Okay, All right, see you next week.